Welcome back, Love Reckoners. David here, joined as always by my good friend and comrade, Matt Leck. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing good, David. Good to be with you.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I'm really happy to be having this conversation. We are joined by Eoin Higgins, who wrote a very interesting book called Owned, How Tech Billionaires on the Right Bought the Loudest Voices on the Left. Thank you so much for joining us on Left Reckoning.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys and your audience. Absolutely. First time, long time, etc.
Oh, I'm happy. I mean, we talked a couple years ago on Colin, which we'll get into in a minute about some of the Nomiki stuff. And your book is interesting. I think our audience will really enjoy this book if you've been following left wing media for a while. I mean, you'll see some familiar faces, and it's very interesting to sort of see like the behind the scenes, side to things. And maybe to get started. We can sort of look at some of the major figures. Matt, should we get into the owned or the owners first? Do you think would be the best way to do it? I thought it might be
good to start with the owners. Like, who are the owners you want to emphasize first, Owen?
Yeah, so this book is kind of two tracks, right? So, like, on the one hand, you're looking at Glenn Greenwald and Matt Taibbi, the nominal owned here. And then the other track is to look at the owners, the tech billionaires on the right, who have both kind of funded and taken over this alternative media ecosphere and kind of turned it into a more right-leaning alternative media. And I think that's obviously not universally true. There's still a lot of left media out there, but this is a specific aspect of that corner of the media landscape. And these guys are names that are probably very familiar to your listeners. We have Peter Thiel, the venture capitalist, the far right funder of all manner of political and media outlets, platforms, and people. We have Mark Andreessen, the former founder of Netscape Navigator, turned venture capitalist, turned, I guess, kind of techno-optimism evangelist. We have David Sachs, who is part of the PayPal mafia, the so-called PayPal mafia, and went to college with Thiel, and is currently, I think, like working with the White House on crypto at the moment. So he has a podcast called All In. And then finally, we have the guy who has become Mr. Headlines recently, Elon Musk. And I don't think he needs any introduction at this point. Tesla, SpaceX. Department of Governmental Efficiency, because I refuse to call it by its nickname. And so these guys put a lot of their money, they're all very, very wealthy. They put a lot of their money into all of these different media platforms. And the net result has been that they've kind of created this network of patronage and payment, which has paid off for people like Glenn and people like Matt, not only exclusively them. And now we're kind of in this situation where their aim, what I believe is their aim, which was kind of decentralized and weaken institutional and critical media, has been realized. And now we're kind of living in that information ecosystem now, which I don't think is completely negative at all. I think that more independent media is good. But I do think that the kind of independent media that they are uplifting and pouring more and more money into is sycophantic and subservient, and that is why they're doing it. So I think that it's important to kind of keep that stuff in context while we're talking about it. But so those are the guys who it is about, and I think it's if I do say so myself, I think it's an interesting topic.
I'd agree with that.
The PayPal stuff has driven me crazy because, as you say, like they sold PayPal to eBay for $1.5 billion. And it always seemed to me that, okay, there was going to be some way to move money. And so some people are going to capitalize on that in the early internet. And we have to live with all these guys and all of their ideas about things in the wake of that. It's sort of revolting to me. Like Thiel, Sachs, is Calacanis one of those guys? I'm not sure, but
I don't think Calacanis is Musk is though. I mean, he's like
Musk
he and Thiel are like the two main ones. Yeah, and
then Omadiah on like the slightly less objectionable politics side of things. Like that it seems so foundational that, and I've been hearing about the PayPal mafia since before they have taken the White House, honestly, like back in the Obama era, right? Like, I'm curious, just what is the PayPal mafia for people who haven't heard of it?
Yeah, so PayPal was created by the merging of two companies called Confinity and X. Confinity was Peter Thiel's company, which had the PayPal product, and X was Elon Musk's company, which had some sort of payment technology that made was kind of essential, right, to making PayPal work. And they started working together in the late '90s, early 2000s, late '90s, and they developed PayPal, and it just exploded. Because it was like they. I think that when we're talking about these guys, it is important to acknowledge the things that they did do. That they did. At one point they did create things that were useful, right? And PayPal was a useful creation. It was a way to it expanded commerce online, right? It made it so that things were a lot easier to do, and they merged their companies, and PayPal was the product and soon kind of became the name of the company. And then Thiel cashed out and Musk took over. And Musk's first thing that he did was basically say, I want to call this company X, the everything app, where people will pay for things and we'll just use it and we'll call it X. And the entire board was like, that's insane. That's going to be we're going to get blacklisted basically because of X-rated stuff. And PayPal is a brand that the name is used as a noun and a verb around the world. And you want to get rid of that and change it into X, both a completely vague and borderline obscene name for a company, right? Like, it didn't make any sense. So they waited until he was on this long delayed honeymoon, and they overthrew him while he was gone and had no cell or internet service, and put Thiel back in charge. Thiel, it solidified the company into PayPal, and then they sell to Pierre Omidyar's eBay, and they're all rich. The Sachs worked, I think, for Thiel, certainly worked for PayPal. He had known Thiel since Stanford, though. They had known each other in college. They had known each other for a long time. And these guys, the PayPal mafia describes them, but it also describes all these other people in their orbit. So Kalanickis would be considered, I think, a member of the PayPal mafia, even if he wasn't a foundational member of it, right? These guys, I mean, the breadth of their investments and their power is really hard to overstate. They have just tons and tons and tons of money everywhere, and they have for a long time. Think about all of these companies that have come out of this, like Tesla, SpaceX, Palantir, David Sachs, many different crypto companies, right? So all this stuff comes out of PayPal and the PayPal mafia and this group of people.
And I haven't heard the term gold pill before, but I do like that as a response. Why is certain person going right wing? It's because they have millions and millions of dollars and own a bunch of properties. I got distracted with what I was going to say about that, David. You want to?
No, I mean, let's talk a little bit about these platforms that you outline here.
Oh, sorry. Just to finish my point is these guys, the right wing with Thiel, the right wing ideas came before the big bag of money. Sachs and Thiel wrote the diversity myth, talking about how could you be against table grapes and think table grapes are somehow racist when all the labor dimensions and stuff of that. He was writing that before he made the big bag of money.
Yeah, Thiel especially has been a long time right-wing political ideologue. Sachs to the same extent, but I think the Sachs doesn't have the same. Trying to figure out how to put this most accurate. I think that Thiel has a long game perspective on this, while Sachs I think is just kind of a reactionary, if that makes sense. Thiel. If you watch him on podcasts, he's very awkward. It's hard for him to get his thoughts across a lot. He comes across kind of he doesn't really know what he's talking about, but I think that is a misunderstanding of him. I think he's actually very intelligent. And I think he has a kind of a long-term goal, even if all of his plans aren't necessarily like working kind of at one time or another. He like there's a goal at the end, and he's always going toward that. So I think it is important to note that these two guys, especially like Andreessen, Musk, Zuckerberg, like you could say, like up and down with their politics, but these two guys for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's an important bit. Just noting, how influential they are in the scene. I mean, let's talk a little bit about like how they are the owners. What are these platforms that they're operating? And then maybe just start transitioning over into talking about some of the owned. What their relationship is with those platforms creators.
Yeah, definitely. So let's I guess we could start with Musk buying Twitter in 2022. That's kind of the most recent like big one. Bought it and has used it to further his economic and political goals blatantly. There's no subtlety to what he's doing like whatsoever, right? So I think that it's kind of like this is the culmination of everything else, right? That like Musk is just like, well, I'm just going to do this, and it doesn't matter. I'm just going to go like all in. But even before that, Rumble in 2021, May 2021, Peter Thiel and JD Vance lead a funding round, put a ton of money into it. Rumble gets a lot of money and spreads that money around. Come back to that in a few minutes, but Andreessen throws tons of money into Substack. Andreessen also throws a bunch of money into a platform called Clubhouse, which is like this kind of like you can participate in podcast network that really took off for a few months, or maybe almost like a year, I guess, during the beginning of the pandemic, and then just kind of tapered off. This is, by the way, like the reason that Andreessen hates Taylor Lorenz is because of her reporting on this platform. That's the beginning of it. She reported critically on it, and he decided that they were just like blood enemies. Basically, like that was kind of what did it with that. And there were also platforms like as we were discussing before we started recording, Rockfin and Callin. So these were two platforms that I had like actual interactions with. So Rockfin was like kind of like a Rumble knockoff, and Rumble is a knockoff of YouTube. So, it's like kind of like wanted me to come on there and stream political content. I think they offered me like $100,000 or something like that. But it was like a year, but it was in crypto, not in real money. So I declined to do it. And I think you were saying that you guys got approached by them as well.
Yeah, they approached us, and they made a kind of offer, and our thinking about it. We did not just we have made not a dime from that platform, right? Because as you're saying, it's pretty fishy. I think some people did make a lot of money on it, which is important to know. But yeah, we did put out some streams on there, and it was a kind of weird platform in general because particularly like the audience, we just streamed one of our episodes that went out to YouTube, Twitch, and then Rockfin, and the chat room was filled with all these people being like, "Oh, shitlibs are not allowed on Rockfin, the free speech platform." So it was a very particular group of people that were tuning in on it. But as you're noting, the fact that this that they were enticing people with like these kind of big numbers. And then it was sort of like, hey, oh yeah, by the way, though, you have to sell these coins to people online to make your money, made it less and less appealing.
Yeah, it was just kind of a non-starter. And then I think in my email, I just to them, I was like, I want like real money, and also I don't really want to be attached professionally to people like Jimmy Dore and Nico House, and there was the this woman who's on RT now. Isabella Russell, whatever Florentina
Fiona,
or whatever.
Yeah.
Fiorella Isabella. Like,
thank you.
Walked in the back of my brain somewhere, just popped out. Yeah, so I didn't want to be like associated with them. So, but Callin was David Sachs's project at the time when I was offered. As I say in the book, I didn't know who he was, and I'm not saying that it would have made a difference, but like I had no idea who he was. I got offered money to go on there and produce podcasts. Callin was kind of Clubhouse, but a little more, I don't want to say sophisticated, but kind of like it allowed you to go on the show and to kind of record it live, but then you could upload you could have the recordings to listen to later. And I did that for a year. and then that one collapsed and it got folded into Rumble, and now it's part of their creator suite, and David Sachs is on the board of Rumble, right? So like it all kind of worked out for everybody there. Most of the episodes are just gone now, though, which is unfortunate, because there were some good episodes, including the one that you came on, David. But so just before we get to the personalities here, I want to say that so these different platforms that we're talking about here are all being invested in by all of these Silicon Valley billionaires. And you have to kind of look at it from their perspective, which is that they were angry with and disappointed with media, that they felt that the quote unquote woke mind virus, as Musk puts it, was a threat to civilization, and they felt that basically that the world was just kind of slipping away from them. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to have a political information. They wanted to project the kind of political information out there that they wanted to have out there. And so they were willing to kind of do this move fast and break things, like kind of idea, right, that they have there. And they wanted to use that to disrupt and to change media. So they threw all their money into all these different platforms. And while the money that they were sending to a lot of people was either life changing or very helpful for people's careers and paying their bills, to them it's nothing, absolutely nothing. $1 million to these guys, just it's pocket change. They have so much money. I was trying to explain this on a podcast earlier last month, and I was just saying that if you have even $1 billion, it's not that 1 million is 1,000th of that. It's that you have so much money that there's a certain amount of money that has that you've reached an obscene standard of living, and that everything else on top of that is just nothing to you, basically, except that everything on top of that is tens and hundreds of millions of dollars, right? So from their perspective, any of this money, it just doesn't matter. They can just throw it around. It is completely irrelevant to them. Especially when we're talking about tens of thousands of dollars. I mean, what do they care? They don't give a shit about that. So when we're talking about all of these different investments that they were putting into these different platforms, and investments where they were just straight up losing money, they don't care. It doesn't matter to them. Same Bezos in the Washington Post. That money doesn't matter to him. If he's talking about how sorry for this rant here, but if he's talking about how he's disappointed in the newsroom for not making money or something, he does not care. He does not care at all. This kind of money just it doesn't matter to him. So anyway, having said all of that, sorry, do you want to say something?
I just want to say, the independent media, it always bugged me when that would be applied to platforms. You can be an independent media producer on any of these platforms and acknowledge that they are still corporate platforms. Rumble, it was literally listed as Cantor Fitzgerald Acquisition Corporation number 4. To call these independent media it's a category error that is being played up a lot by some of these figures.
I think that's mostly true, but I think that they're the voices that they platform on the platform, the voices that they uplift on the platform, right, are voices who are more associated with independent media, right? So somebody for example, Glenn Greenwald has made his career on being an independent voice. To the extent that that's true or not is a different discussion. He's definitely made his name on that. Matt Taibbi has also sort of made his name on that, although he's kind of done a little more kind of mainstream stuff with Rolling Stone. But these are just two names, right? There are lots of. Rumble, like I said, so they invest. Thiel and Vance throw their money into it in May of 2021. In August of 2021, they announced that they have a multi-year deal with Glenn Greenwald and also a deal with Tulsi Gabbard, right? They're just giving money to the people who they want to give money to. But Glenn before that had left The Intercept, had gone to Substack and was just doing things on Substack and a little bit, I think, on YouTube, right? He was doing his podcast or whatever on YouTube. But the question here is not are the platforms independent? the question is, are the voices independent? And I think that the people who are the voices would argue that they are, definitely. But I think that you could make an argument that they are providing a platform and a place for more independent-minded people to be. Now, it doesn't mean that the independence of their minds is something that is like good, right? Or that they're like what they're saying is like left leaning or left aligned or reality based or like whatever. But they would, I think they would still argue that their platform is doing that. And then for people like Matt and Glenn, who both left in institutional media, even though I would say Taibbi worked for Condé Nast through like Rolling Stone, but Glenn worked for Omidyar through The Intercept. The Intercept's like more independent, but they did go to Substack and made their money there, and Taibbi's still there. It's just like what else happened around that is what is like that's why like you can't really say that they're independent. Like in this discussion, we can acknowledge they're not, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like the kind of question, like the thing about like the paying of like any creator, I think there's like something that I think us here all understand, but sometimes I think people in the like who may not be familiar with these things may not, is that like particularly like for like Colin's show or any of these other kind of things, when they're bringing people on the platform, I think that like there's certainly like we want to get these big fish, which is like that's why folks like Taibbi and Greenwald got like huge contracts, and then there are people getting like very small amounts that were probably just sort of being thrown. So it's like, okay, this is the platform where independent media is at. But at any time when people are getting money, it's fair to ask questions about like how that's influencing how they're thinking. And that's why I sort of wanted to zoom in a little bit on Greenwald and Taibbi, because their trajectory has been interesting, and Matt has like a kind of intimate experience. I mean, I remember we interviewed Matt Taibbi on TMBS back in the day.
You know what the topic was?
Please tell.
Elon Musk.
Yeah, you're totally right.
Yeah, and as Dave was alluding to, I worked for Matt Taibbi on the Tarfu report that he hosted with Alex Perrine at the time that the sort of cancellation of Taibbi happened, that I think really did set him along this trajectory. And I'll say, like, he was a much more chill guy than some of the stories you hear of him maybe in the Obama administration. He was a good guy to work for. I made a decent check from that, and I was sad to see it end. But unfortunately, like, there's one thing with his relationship specifically with Musk that I was disappointed in, because the last thing I ever got from him was after that show ended, the Tarfu report, because of the accusations about him. That I also will hasten to add, I've also heard have been looked into, and nobody actually has a personal misconduct in terms of like an abusive, sexual abusive actual behavior by him. It was the book he did with Mark Ames. But I remember being in the office with him, and that stuff was bubbling up for months before it eventually hit head with the NPR interview. And people were saying, you got to just forthrightly address this stuff. And he didn't want to, and he looked frankly afraid of doing that. And so it was really disappointing to me when years later he's starting to do this stuff about how he's feeling brave about standing up and saying what needs to be said about like rapes by trans people in prisons. And I look at that period as not bravery, but a tryout for Elon Musk, because Elon Musk was all in his replies liking that stuff. And I'm curious if you read that the same way.
Yeah. So I didn't find anyone who could back that up either, that there was any there weren't ever any actual like above board accusations of him doing anything like that in the workplace. Right. I mean, I heard from a couple people who worked for him who didn't enjoy working with him that he was an asshole, and I heard from us other people who did like working with him that he was fine. And I think that's kind of the way it is with anybody, right? But I think that it wasn't just the book, though. It was also like the things that he wrote at the Exile, the way that he wrote about women at the Exile, the way that he wrote about women in general. I think that I think that his like cancellation was, and as I say in the book, like it was in many ways really opportunistic on the part of people like Mike Cernovich, who really like led this thing, right? But you're right, like him not addressing it is like why it even was able to spiral out of control and like destroy his book tour there and kind of send him careening down this path of becoming a right-wing culture warrior. I think that's totally true. As far as him like doing tryouts, I mean, I think that he had been kind of culturally moving to the right anyway for some time, and I think that he and Taibbi, I mean, David Sachs, I think, was the one who recommended that Taibbi be the person that must give this, extremely curated nothing burger of like, files from inside Twitter to him. And Andreessen, by the way, is the one who made sure that Weiss got them, right? So there's there's some crossover here, but he's certainly. I think that if you look at Taibbi's behavior after getting the files, like so up until he breaks with Musk, is so sycophantic, and it's so like it's bootlicking basically. Like he goes on podcasts and he says that Elon Musk has like a good sense of humor. I mean, it's like come on, man, like you don't have to do this. Like, you know what I mean? Like that's not true. That's objectively not true. I think that is easy to say that is like not a truth.
Yeah.
Or that like that Musk, I think he said to Jordan Ull and David Sirota, as I know in the book, like he says that like Musk bought Twitter because he has a commitment to free speech. I mean, it's just like, you don't need to say that. And then, he only breaks with Musk when Musk threatens Substack, because that's how Taibbi makes his money. And then once he is like kind of like barred from getting the files anymore, like he still keeps trying to like get back in Elon's good graces. If you watch him on all those podcasts he's like, I just hope that he like goes back to me, like all this kind of stuff. And then he releases these text messages where he's like, I've tried not to criticize you in public. It's just like, and I think that and as I note in the book, but I think this is really important moment, like when he's talking to Jordan and David, like Jordan's like, hey, in your book Hate Incorporated, you say that if there's a reporter who Department of Defense or like whatever are going to leak documents to, like they're leaking the documents to them because they know that they are going to put forward the kind of message that they want to put forward. Like, how is what you're doing any different? And Taibbi just like, has a meltdown because he doesn't really have an answer for that. But I think that just applying his own like standards to him, I think that it's kind of obvious what happened.
Yeah, and I mean, one important plot point we should cover too is, and it's interesting that you say Sachs made that connection, because he used to follow me on Twitter until I was one of the few people who would do like the only follower replies, and I called him bad word. But Russiagate also, I think, is a huge thing. And I think like a lot of Taibbi's, like I was producing Taibbi in the early part of that. I think a lot of his critique of Russiagate was accurate in the way Democrats used it to avoid reality, basically. Like we should address that a little bit too.
Yeah, I mean, like 100%. If you read the stuff that I was writing back then, it was the same. Like I was like pretty locked in with him and Glenn on this stuff. I probably like still am to an extent. Like I don't like have like I don't have a lot of time for it. But also, I think that probably what's different is that Matt's still talking about it. And like it's just like, man, like what are you doing? Like it's just he's just like the people that he's angry at, like who are still talking about it, right? It's like you're playing the hits, man. But this was like 8 years ago now. Like like come on, like it's time to move on a little bit. Like so while I would say that I agree with them, I think that their fixation on Russiagate and the Democratic liberal media reaction to the Russia stuff kind of put them into a position where they just stopped like really treating Trump like the threat he was and treating the GOP like the threat they were. And Glenn would get accused of this, and he would say, you know what, you can find that stuff wherever. I'm trying to like propose an alternative here. Like I'm doing like a different type of criticism, and I just don't think that really works because I think that at a certain point you have to deal with reality as it stands. And I think that it was good to push back against this stuff 100%. But I just feel like it's just kind of like it went to the point where it was just got kind of boring and became kind of more like generalized Trump and Republican apologia rather than like actually addressing them.
Well, I will just say, not even really as a defense of them. It is kind of wild how this stuff I keep on thinking it's dead, and then it will pop up again. We've seen it kind of this week. But to keep
100%, I totally agree. I mean, like it makes me insane. It
you
does,
just think it's dead, and it comes. But to talk a little bit about Glenn, because his stuff is interesting, and talking about a whole turnaround. Glenn is somebody, as we've talked about on this program and on the Michael Brooks show, and we covered Brazil a lot. Glenn was somebody who, like Lula specifically, thanked for his work, in exposing the sham trial against him. And Glenn is also somebody who's been like personally threatened by Bolsonaro. And now we see this kind of weird double move, I would say, sometimes from Glenn on these kind of things. I mean, how would you sort of describe Glenn's trajectory? And maybe sort of like how we think that these platforms may be playing a role in that, if they're playing a role at all,
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting that you bring up Lula, right? Because he was a Lula ally for sure, and or at least for a time, and was definitely opposed to Bolsonaro. Now he does seem to be playing this kind of double game where he is kind of like supporting Lula or supporting almost Bolsonaro, or not Bolsonaro exactly, but like Bolsonaro-esque elements of the Brazilian political establishment, and criticizing Lula, and which is fine. Like whatever, like that's fine. But
totally.
But it is just interesting that he has switched. I think if he actually starts to defend Bolsonaro, then I'll be like, I don't know about that one, man. Like he killed, like that's probably, but but whatever he wants to do, I guess. But Glenn's political evolution and the way that he's changed over the past, I guess it's like 20 years I kind of cover in the book, is interesting. He goes from starting his blogging career being a critic, generally, of George W. Bush on a civil libertarian perspective. That's kind of when I discovered him in the late Bush years. I thought he was great. I really, really appreciated that somebody was speaking in the way that he was speaking about this kind of stuff. He then continued to do that during the blogosphere. He was doing that. Then he continued to do that at Salon and The Guardian during the Obama years. And it was good to have a left-aligned critique of Obama, while so many people within that blogosphere milieu were not doing that. They were kind of forgetting that they opposed that kind of stuff now that it was a Democrat doing it. I think that what I just said there, that because it was a Democrat, I think that kind of broke Glenn's brain. I think that watching all of these people that he had been aligned with or allied with turn into kind of just Democratic mouthpieces, specifically in the book. So I talked to him for hours for this book. Matt did not want to talk to me, but Glenn was happy to talk, and we had a good conversation. And during it, we talked about like this shift, right? This political shift that he had. And he talks about how, specifically he and Rachel Maddow, like just kind of took different paths. They just went in different directions. I thought that was really interesting. And I think that there's probably a feeling of betrayal on both of their sides, especially like now, Glenn's particularly nasty to her online. She generally tends to ignore him, I think, but like, they're so diametrically opposed on so many of these issues. Like, and I'm leaving aside like liberal issues, conservative issues, like Democrats, Republicans, stuff like that. I'm not talking about that. Like, if you're just talking about like national security state stuff, they are really like on the opposite side now of each other. And I think that Glenn could probably make an argument that he's still closer to where they started in a lot of ways. Although, arguably Maddow wasn't ever particularly that left wing on that stuff or much, but it's kind of splitting hairs too. But I think for Glenn, that experience kind of radicalized him, not so much to the left, or not so much to the right, but like radicalized him kind of into contrarianism, which then radicalized him kind of, I think, into the right. So by the time that like 2020 rolls around, his reaction to COVID is initially, oh shit, this is bad. And then becomes, he kind of starts to tilt into that kind of right wing culture war, anti-mask, anti-shutdown stuff that, and he doesn't kind of come out of it in any kind of like a left aligned way. He just kind of like takes a more culture war approach to it. At this point, this is according to people that I talked to who were at the Intercept at the time. He's becoming further. He's going further and further and further to the right, and also within the newsroom, right? And also is just like it's very obvious that he's looking for a way out. So he writes this article about Hunter Biden. A lot of it based on the provenance of the Hunter Biden laptop and information that was allegedly in there. The editors are like, we can't publish this because we don't know. Because at the time, for people, just to remind everybody, like the laptop kind of came out and it was like in the New York Post, and it was obviously from like Rudy Giuliani, and nobody knew if like what was in it was true or not. The election was in like a week. Like there were like real reasons. And I'm not talking about like what Twitter did with it. I'm talking about like what the Intercept did. I don't think that they were in the wrong, because they were just kind of like, we don't know what this is, and if this is if this is like rat fucking, like we don't want to be a part of that, Like we can't report this as fact. Yeah.
Just to enter real quick there, the only thing that made this controversial was Glenn had a clause in his contract saying he can't be edited, right? Like, and so if he was any other, no, is that wrong?
No, not true. So he showed me his contract. He didn't have a clause in it saying he couldn't be edited, saying that he wouldn't be. He said that like editors would get to look over what he put out if it was something like kind of timely, But I mean, generally he had a clause like editors couldn't really mess with his stuff, but like they would be able to look at it, like they could say you can't publish that, like absolutely.
And point being, if he was any other writer, that would have been inserted into it, and you wouldn't hear about it.
Yeah, exactly, and or I mean that stuff would have just been removed. I mean that's all that they wanted to do. They were just I've seen a lot of the emails. They were just like, no, we just want you to like basically like not include like some of this information that's coming from the lab, because we don't know what that is. Like you can talk about this other stuff, but you're coming, and then they also said, you're making some you're jumping to some conclusions here that we don't feel like is supported, and just because of the sensitivity, like we would rather you not do that. And so anyway, so the blow up from that is he leaves the Intercept. He starts his own Substack. This is in October, November 2020. His Substack explodes, obviously because he's Glenn Greenwald, also because he's on Tucker Carlson, like just to boost those numbers. And by August 2021, he does call in at the same time. August 2021, he signs a contract with Rumble, goes over to there, and ever since then he's kind of done this kind of. He's kind of become more and more like a partisan Republican on not all issues, but a lot of them. I think you could notably say that on Palestine, he has maintained some of his kind of principled positions from before. However, he constantly frames this stuff as, people on the right shouldn't be like people on the left who are naturally censorious. You know what I mean? Like, so it's kind of like, it's good that you're doing this, man, but like at the same time, it's not completely honest what you're doing. You know what I mean? And that's kind of like where my objection comes to it. And I think that Glenn's more. Matt now is like just a straight up right wing culture warrior. You go to his Twitter page, if you go to his Substack, if you watch his appearances on like Newsmax or like whatever, it's just like gutter right wing bullshit. But Glenn is a lot more clever in that what he says, there's always like a little bit of a hedge to it. You can tell that he's a lawyer. I think you can like he's smart. Like the way that he words things always kind of leaves him a little bit of an out. And even though, and I think that you need to have context when you're reading him, especially when you're reading stuff that he wrote like a while ago. You have to have that context of like what was going on, because the context will kind of explain like what he's really talking about. Because if you look at a lot of the way that he writes, again, it's very clever. If you look at the way that he writes, and you're looking at it with no context, a lot of time you're like, well, I don't see what's really so like objectionable about this. And it's like, well, you might not, but like let's like put this in context. Let's see what else was going on politically. Let's see what he's actually reacting to, and often that'll kind of explain, for good and for bad. Like like depends on how far back you go. But so that's kind of my Gwen spiel.
One more thing, you included Branko Marcetich's take on the sort of Twitter files thing, and we had Branko on during that period to try to, get what we could out of that whole period. But I also sort of agree with guest of the show, Robert Skvarla's take that what Doge is doing right now is sort of a version of the Twitter files on the government. And as you point out, there was no evidence of government influence on those decisions coming out of the Twitter files. It was basically a spectacle of journalism done on for billionaires.
Yeah, I think I included Branko's in there because I thought that it was an example of somebody, maybe like a little more left aligned, kind of, like making this argument. I think that. Or not, like having kind of a more positive feel. And I actually I think I probably kind of come down kind of close to that. Like, I think it's really interesting and really important to see how these platforms work. I don't have any objection to anything that was released in the Twitter files being released. Outside of like anybody's like personal private information or whatever. Like I think that stuff I think it's good. My problem with it is like Matt acting like this was like the Snowden files. Like it just like that's just not what it was, like it just wasn't that. And there wasn't anything in there that really like delivered on what they were saying. I mean, like I say in the book, like between Matt and Barry, the biggest thing that they had come out was that Libs of TikTok had like a special dispensation under the prior to Musk regime, right? That you couldn't really mess with her stuff without getting prior approval. Like that's kind of important. But like everything else was kind of just like I mean, it's like kind of interesting to like kind of look under the hood and see how they operate. Li Fang's article was interesting. I don't know if it wasn't like groundbreaking or earth shattering or anything, but it was interesting. Like that was like definitely a piece of news. But I just don't feel like what they quote unquote uncovered in there was particularly.
I mean,
useful or interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I mean, we might not have the time to hash it all out here. I mean, like, the fact of like, one, you have like major corporation, and two, relationship with the state is like, I think genuinely newsworthy. The thing that's really frustrating about the Twitter files for me, at least, was that one, the way that it's presented to the public by both Taibbi and Weiss was that there's a huge government conspiracy to keep some of the wealthiest and most influential people on the planet from getting their message out to the public, right? There wasn't a focus, for example, on like, how these platforms were also doing a lot of work to, I mean, this is a big issue now, but even back then, suppressing like speech about Palestine, that kind of stuff, right? All kinds of wild things and activities that Twitter was involved in. And also just the desire of the state, even when Twitter was saying no, is the desire of the state to get engaged in these kind of things. But I mean,
but I would say, yeah, like that stuff is interesting and that stuff is newsworthy, and it is. And I think that the important part of like what you're saying is that that's not what they decided to prioritize. And so that is kind of like why the Twitter files themselves are not particularly like newsworthy or interesting, because they're not really showing something that is like groundbreaking, right? Like it's like if you want to talk about like if you want to say that the Trump administration and the Biden campaign both pressuring Twitter to take down different members of Congress, like yes, that is an example of somebody like using their influence, but it didn't always work. Like they would say yes or no, as they would with any powerful person, assumedly, or hypothetically any person, but like let's be real here. But like any powerful person, right? Like now, is it interesting that like that elements of the national security state were working with Twitter and we're asking them questions? Yes, like that is interesting. Is it interesting that different parts of the federal government were asking them to take down different content, or in some cases asking them to like promote or like put back up certain pieces of content. That is interesting, definitely. But I think that again, like when you're presenting this as like some huge conspiracy, because this is like kind of Taibbi's thing still, right? He presents this huge conspiracy by liberals in the government and liberals in the national security state. I don't really know how this works, considering that like a lot of the time he's talking about Trump appointees, but whatever. They're all liberals if they're trying to do this, apparently. But it hit that there's this kind of vast web conspiracy to like shut down like right wing speech and to like like that, like that's not reality. And I think that is kind of the point here, that now, because they took it from Musk and it was such like a carefully curated like files and such carefully curated information, like what that's done is not only to like push forward the message that that Musk wants to get forward, but it's also muddied the waters, right? So now there's no way to really ever be able to trust anything you get out of that. I mean, not that you would after Musk mismanaging it for like 2.5 years, but like, do you know what I mean? Like, so it's kind of, it like serves a lot of purposes for them.
Well, I mean, this was the kind of final point that I was going to get to, is like, well, now the reality is that the guy who owns Twitter is sitting in the fucking Oval Office, right? So it's just sort of like, that line between corporate power and the state is like almost, completely non-existent at this point. And I don't even think we need another round of Twitter files. So I'd be very happy to get them and to look through them if we could, to see what's going on now. But I mean, I think more than anything, I mean, this kind of exposes the really dangerous world we live in when it comes to access to information. Because you have Twitter now, it's gone. Obviously, the Washington Post story, and now independent media, right? Which I just don't think we're going to have enough time to get into all these things. But I'll just note it, maybe in closing, if you had any thoughts on this. One of the things that has been kind of interesting about like this whole independent media moment is that there's been a hope that will help people sort of break out of corporate influence and corporate power, the power of the rich, get the true story out there. But the fact of the matter is, like, one, there's the platform's problem and maybe people getting money and things like that, as you sort of note in your book. Two, there's the structure of the way that these platforms operate. I don't know your experience with these kind of things, but here on Left Reckoning, we cover a whole host of things. I'll tell you, unfortunately, the stuff that usually goes to the very, very top might not always be the most nutritious content. And that's not just a problem of audience, right? More than not, that's like a problem of the platform of YouTube, right? And podcasting in general. It's like it pushes certain kind of stories. So, there's a real tension here where it's like, I don't think the answer is like, oh, we got to return to everybody just subscribe to the New York Times or the Washington Post, obviously, because they have problems as well. But I think maybe recognizing the problems that this independent media landscape and ecosystem has, being more astute to what can happen. But yeah, I'm curious your kind of closing thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I think that what we're in the middle of right now is just a pretty major media revolution. And I'm not necessarily saying that as a negative or positive thing. I'm just saying that the structure of media that existed, even for most of our lives, and I think that we've been alive for like this massive decline in institutional media, the rise of online media, now the kind of crashing of that influencer media. Now, like, it's just everything is just kind of all just like has been going kind of wild for a while. I think that like something will come out of it that will be good and bad. It'll just like it just will be. You know what I mean? Like we will see something come out of it. Hopefully, it's not going to be all corporate platforms or corporate capture of independent voices, as you're talking about. But I think that the problems, though, as far as like the more nutritious content, right, are deeper than that. Like, yes, like you can probably get more views on YouTube for this conversation if you like highlight like the
tell all,
like Eoin Higgins destroys something like that. You know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. Like for some reason, the algorithm. I mean, I see that stuff on my YouTube feed all the time, even like and stuff that I don't want to like watch, but it's still like there because it's framed that way. But I do think that I was at this event in Baltimore last Saturday, and this woman in the audience made this really perceptive question where she was just like, why is it that we always talk about rich people and corporate power and the powerful, instead of like highlighting the lives and the struggles and just, you know, the general, like, just being working class. And both, and like, that's when I had a Substack, like that was one of the things that I tried to do. And I was there with Max Alvarez from The Real News, and he was like, I have a podcast that's about that. And we were both like, and the problem is that people are just not as interested in it as they should be. And I don't know if that has to do with our short attention span right now, or just like the flood of bullshit that's like always, like, you know, like coming at us politically. But I think that it is true. And I don't really like necessarily like have a solution for that. But I think it would be great if, you know, if there was just some sort of funding mechanism outside of crowdfunding, outside of state funding, outside of billionaire funding. I mean, I don't really know what's left after saying those three, but like, you know, what I mean? Like, I wish that there was like some way to get that money out there, or because ultimately that is kind of the thing. Like, in order to do this work, you need to get paid. In order to do any kind of work, you need to get paid. And I think that those stories are the ones that are really important. But it also kind of strikes me that the only time that those stories really like blow up on the like New York Times or Washington Post or like Wall Street Journal mainstream media, right, is if it's like some big splashy like Sunday front page story, and it's like the most depressing thing you've ever read in your life. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like heartbreaking. Instead of it being like, hey, why don't we like not only talk about like how things are hard for people, like definitely like we need to like talk about that, like the struggle is important, but also like should be talking about like how things just are, and like
what your life is like, what work is like, all those kind of questions. For sure.
Like Studs Terkel working kind of thing, like that kind of thing I think is really important. So I don't necessarily like know how we get there, but I think you're right that it's like that's kind of like a higher order problem than the kind of immediate problem of like kind of figuring out like left media and independent media. But like the higher order problem is that, like, okay, even if we figure out that or figure that out, like, then how do we like make sure that we're kind of rewriting and kind of resetting the way that we even tell these stories? I think that's kind of what you're getting at, right? And so I think that's also really
well. The book is really excellent, and it's a really great look at all of this. We'll have a link, obviously, below for people to pick it up. It is owned How Tech Billionaires on the right, bought the loudest voices on the left. Really great speaking with you. Is there anything else that folks should be checking out to keep up with you and your work?
I mean, you can find me on social media, but you know, otherwise it's pretty much like all book all the time right now. So but I'll keep you guys posted for sure.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Owen.
Thank you.